Alright, you've read the title, you know what's going on. I'm not going to waste your time with any of this jibber-jabbering nonsense. We're just going to jump into my ranking of the Best Picture nominees for the 98th, I believe, Academy Awards, which will be hosted by Conan O'Brien on 15th of March, 2026. I'll see you soon. Here's number 10, let's go.
Oh, Frankenstein, you were the monster the whole time, man. Raw, man, damn.
Frankenstein 2025. This is another Del Toro film that's been nominated for an Oscar, and I genuinely can't see why this film's nominated for Best Picture. It seems like at this point, anytime Del Toro releases a film, like for some reason it's automatically in nominations for Oscars. Pinocchio 2022, his last film, it's been 3 years, and that was nominated for Best Animated Picture, and in my opinion that was a very good film. I love that film. I think honestly Del Toro should stick to animation at this point. It seems to be what he's better at, but again, he's made some good live action films in the past. The Shape of Water was nominated for an Oscar, 2018 maybe. Nightmare Alley was previously nominated for an Oscar as well, and that's another film where I'm like, that was a fine, okay film, but I don't see how it deserved to be Oscar nominated. And this is where I stand similarly with Frankenstein. It's a fine Netflix film. It's stylized, maybe that's why he gets nominated all the time. But overall, I found it quite disappointing. I am a fan of some Del Toro films. I think Pan's Labyrinth is a masterpiece. I couldn't help but feeling disappointed after watching this. There was definitely redeeming factors, but I don't think it's one I'm going to particularly remember. Maybe in a month or so, it's not going to be a film I think about very much. And I think generally from the films I've seen from Del Toro, this is probably one of the weaker ones. It's one of the ones I have the most problems with. And it's my problem with a lot of films that are being released, especially on streaming services. It just didn't need to be that long for me. The story of Frankenstein, it's an interesting story. I'm sure the book's great, I've never read it, but it's like 2.5 hours, maybe more, and I'm just like, I don't see the need for this amount of length for what is a relatively simple and straightforward story, maybe. Although saying this, I do think some of the shots did look really nice, but overall there was a certain Netflixy feel to the whole thing, even that was overshadowing the obvious skill that Del Toro has for filmmaking. Like the opening scene is a prologue to the film, and it's set in the snow and there's a big ship, and it felt to me like the Polar Express or like one of them naughties, like Robert Zemeckis animated weird films, and it just looked off, and I couldn't get into how it looked. I love Oscar Isaac, I think he's a great actor, but most of the performances in this film I couldn't get behind. I thought they were really hammy and overdramatic, and I think hammy and overdramatic executions of roles can work in certain contexts, but this just didn't feel like it served the story particularly well. Maybe a different approach would have made me connect with these characters more, because overall I just didn't really care about these characters if anyone died or anything. It just felt like almost slapstick, and it didn't get an emotional reaction out of me. The one exception maybe is the Frankenstein monster's character, who I think Jacob Elroyd actually did a really good job portraying, considering. Even though it looks a bit weird, it's not how I picture Frankenstein in my head, but like I'm not sure again about the book, but it seems like a unique adaptation of that sort of character. And again, back to how it was shot, I think a lot of the sets they actually made for it were really impressive and like grand and large scale, but then the way they shoot it didn't really blow me away, even though they had these ridiculous sets. I think one set was even, it's that famous painting shot from Barry Lyndon, and I just don't think that even though the sets are impressive, that the overall style just didn't really gel with me. And I think this is probably partially because of like a very the modern age to just put everything through so much post-processing that you can't even tell what was real anymore and what's like graphics or computer-generated effects or whatever, and everything just feels a bit fake and like 2009 Avatar type of floatiness. And I'm a bit mixed on the writing style as well. Again, I said a lot of it was over dramatic and hammy, and but I will say some of the melodrama I did really enjoy it. I thought it was enjoyable to watch. It was entertaining. It didn't really strike a chord with me. This kind of thing can work in isolation. Again, it didn't really gel with the story for me. And I don't know what dialogue moments I should credit from the book and what's written for the film, but there's the odd line. It's just so on the nose, and it completely takes me out of the experience. There's the one line where he literally says to Victor Frankenstein, "You are the monster," or "You were the monster all along," or something along them lines. And it's like, yeah, I could have figured that out myself. I don't know. You just spell it out for me. Have some respect for your audience. You don't need to tell me the themes of the film directly. Again, maybe that was in the book, but I still don't think that's a defense. I can't see that being in the book either. I might be wrong. I will say though, I think it did improve towards the end. I guess you can't really spoil Frankenstein. It's Frankenstein. He makes a monster. I'll try not to spoil it as much as I can. I guess it's framed in different perspectives though. I think half or maybe more than half of the film is from the perspective of Victor Frankenstein, the creator of the monster, and then the other half of the film is split up into the monster's perspective, and kind of, it's still in a very chronological order. It's quite a straightforward narrative, but this monster's perspective for me was so much more interesting. I guess I just wasn't invested in the sort of character dynamics between the main cast, but the monster stuff, I thought there's something there, that there's a good film in there somewhere from a monster's perspective, and maybe just ditching off all the crappy drama between the people that aren't related to the monster. Again, I think that probably extends the runtime. That's why I sort of lost interest through early parts of the film. But I don't think it's a bad film. I think it's fine, and I think it's expected for Del Toro to make this kind of film, but I can't help but I have such high expectations for Del Toro films, especially if they're nominated for Oscars. But I just couldn't get behind how this one came together. So even though there's some definitely impressive set pieces and sets, and I can appreciate the large scale of it and what they're trying to do, and it sort of frames a cyclical thing. I understand why they framed it in this way and structured it in this way. It's sort of saying, Frankenstein, or Victor Frankenstein himself, had issues with his own father, which then he sort of replicated onto his son. I don't know if that's the word. He replicated onto his monster. So he's sort of taken the anger out that he felt in his own childhood towards his own father, and he's taken that out in like a vicious cycle towards the Frankenstein's monster. Which it could be it's the tale as old as time, pretty much. The sins of the father, and also like this vicious cycle of violence that sort of carries through the world we live in, and the consequences of this, and it sort of it strips it back to like nature and like the wolves versus the humans at points, and like I think it's kind of radicalizes Frankenstein in his own sense. It's an interesting view of how something like that would see the world, I think, especially when he's being basically tortured by his creator. I think that there's lots of really interesting themes here, and it almost makes me want to read the book, because I don't like how it was executed ultimately. And that's sort of my problem. Even though I can enjoy the themes, I can appreciate what they were trying to do, but it didn't look good to me. It didn't connect with me, even though I know it can. So maybe a different Frankenstein adaptation in the future that's maybe a bit less hammy and a bit less melodramatic and a bit more grounded down to earth. Maybe like a Robert Eggers style. He made Nosferatu. Recently, he's made a lot of really more grounded period piece films. I feel like that can sort of work with the Frankenstein story, but I just don't think Del Toro's really eccentric and stylized vision of things really complements Frankenstein's story very well. And I'll leave it at that. I don't think it was a bad film. I think it's a solid, alright film. I give it a sort of 6 out of 10, if that number matters. And yeah, can't help but being disappointed, but I look forward to whatever Del Toro does next. I think maybe I like his animated stuff more and his stop motion. I love Pinocchio. Maybe something more like that. Or maybe go back and make a Spanish film again, because Pan's Labyrinth was, very brilliant. That's my thoughts on Frankenstein. I think this is controversial. I think people like Frankenstein a lot. I don't think it's going to win Best Picture. I don't think it deserves to be nominated for Best Picture. But it's a fine film, and if you like the Frankenstein story and you like that sort of setting, you'll probably enjoy it. So yeah, that's why it's ranked so low on the list. Okay, quite predictably, F1 2025. I don't have loads of things to say about this film. I feel like it's been a bit overhated and a bit dragged on just because, it's kind of like a sports action movie that's been nominated for an Oscar. And I feel like a lot of film nerdy people, sort of that's not what appeals to them, which is fair enough, and that's a fine thing. But it's not a bad film in any sense. It's very much an advertisement for the F1, which is is to be expected. I think Lewis Hamilton produced the film, and it's sort of him trying to get people interested in the sport, which I think worked to an extent. But yeah, ultimately I think it just maybe doesn't deserve the Oscar nod, but just from a technology perspective, it was pretty good, and there was some good sequences in it. A lot of the F1 driving car sequences just really, really well shot and looked amazing and so grounded, but I'll get into that a little bit later. But I'm just going to start by saying it's not a bad film like some may be presenting it to be, and obviously it's ranked low on my list because it's it's competing with a lot of really good and interesting films, but it's just a solid summer blockbuster. Obviously this is Joseph Kosinski, who recently made Top Gun Maverick, which before I wasn't like crazy about any of his films particularly, but Top Gun Maverick really stood out to me as like one of the great summer blockbusters, and probably one of the best films of 2023, I want to say. 2022, what else? It has to be longer than I thought. You made Tron Legacy. I actually quite like Tron Legacy. It's not very good though. Got a good soundtrack. But yeah, it just feel like it's sort of building on the technology that was sort of pioneered in Top Gun Maverick, but like ultimately the experience of the film is, you know, it's less impactful, the story's less captivating, and the action isn't quite up to the snuff of, you know, Top Gun Maverick, which was just quite incredible in my mind. Obviously it's fucking aeroplanes flying around shooting each other versus some cars driving around, but it just doesn't feel like the, you know, the cinematic marvel of Top Gun. I don't want to bring up Top Gun too much because, you know, comparisons to FIFA Joy and all that, but in my head there's a lot of overlap between the two films. It's a very cliched film, especially in the sports drama genre, which I guess there's 2 sports dramas in the nominations in a sense, but yeah, for me, you just cannot deny how good them racing scenes are. They look so good, and when it does get into top gear, it does feel special and like innovative, and the way it flings the cameras around, and I don't know how. I'm quite interested how they actually got to film in a lot of these scenes of, you know, Brad Pitt driving around in a race car. I don't know if they actually told Brad Pitt how to drive F1 cars. I highly doubt it, because that's a difficult thing to do, but it looked really good and authentic and innovative ultimately from a technological perspective, but also, you know, like in its pacing and its camera work when shooting these sort of scenes, it was quite electric watching these cars drive around. And I think it's harder than you might expect to make fast cars driving around look actually good, because when you watch fast cars drive on film, they look so much slower than they feel like when you're actually in the car, and they managed to sort of frame this in a way where you really felt the speed. And I feel like it would have been, if I watched this in like an IMAX cinema, it would have been a much more captivating experience for me. But ultimately I didn't watch it on a big IMAX screen, so maybe that took me out of it a little bit. But from that sense, I think the film is amazing. Unfortunately, there's everything else in the film which in my mind drags it down a bit. You know, it's a story that you wouldn't be too hard pressed to find in like Cars 3 or something, in a sense. Like it's not a groundbreaking story in any sense, and it's not particularly well executed where I really care about any of these characters. I think Brad Pitt's got a good personality. Well, Brad Pitt's always a charismatic lead in my mind, and you know, you can't really go wrong with get him in front of a camera and he can carry a scene. But I just didn't care about his character or the other guy. I don't remember the actor's name, but he was fine. All the actors were fine, and there's a lot of British actors in this as well, but a lot of you know, actors you see around, famous faces. In my mind, it just lacks that romanticism of like a true summer blockbuster, like a Jaws or something. You know, that's the great summer blockbuster. It lacks a bit of that charisma and personality and, you know, romanticism, and I just wasn't hooked into the story particularly. I wasn't really like out of it, but I was just sort of plodding along with it. Like, this is fun, and I don't have a problem really with it, but it's just not particularly good. You know, occasionally it does have this sort of corniness and like over sentimentality, which it can work. It does work in a sense, and it's like, yeah, okay, this is a bit fun, but it didn't fully commit to that, and I think you sort of have to go all the way or not at all with that sort of over sentimentality, corniness angle. Yeah, I'll be all for it if it was that, but at the same time, it's just trying to be such like a cool and sleek modern film with like this R&B soundtrack and like montages with this over serious like cutting and trying to make all the characters look cool and sleek and modern, and all the cars look like really fucking sick. But I just feel like combining that element with sort of the corniness, it's a hard balance to find. You know, it doesn't really work for me, and it just feels off overall, and I think that's why it doesn't really work. It just feels a bit bland in the end. It sort of fails from both angles, you know. And I sort of mentioned about the camera work before. It does do some similar shots to Top Gun Maverick, and uses some similar techniques which I guess have adapted from that, and that does add some personality to the project rather than just feeling like a bland, you know, sports car film. I think Joseph Kosinski does have a directorial style, and I would just like to see that a little bit more, I think, from in the future, because you see it in Top Gun Maverick, you see it a little bit in hints in this film, but there just wasn't enough personality really for me. Although I can appreciate how it was shot, and I think the way it was shot was fine for what it was, and I can appreciate that to some extent. But I mean, even if the colour palette was just a little bit more, you know, less as grey, it was just a bit dull in the end. It didn't really feel too cinematic in the scenes that weren't just so energetic and action heavy. But I think just the commitment to the practical effects and, you know, these innovative shooting techniques, especially along cars, it makes the film feel more real and like consequential and like purposeful, and like it wasn't just made just for box office gains. It was actually trying to innovate on the medium somewhat, which is nice, and I think that's ultimately why it got the Oscar nod. And ultimately I think it did as well achieve its goal of making F1 look kind of sick and not like a completely boring sport, which from what I've seen it was a bit, but I would like to get into F1 at some point. You know, fast cars can't completely carry it for me. Again, Lewis Hamilton was producer, so I think it's probably achieved its goal of getting more people into the sport and interested in F1, as that racing series on Netflix did the other year, a few years ago. But overall, just for me, the script just left a lot to be desired. It wasn't particularly well written. A lot of the dialogue was just like eye-roll worthy and just a bit corny, but to be fair, I never felt the film drag. I had a good experience overall. The thing just flew by for me, and I think it just left me feeling pretty good, even though it's not going to stick in my mind and it just feel a bit generic at points. But yeah, that's sort of my feelings on that. I'm at like a solid 6 out of 10 at the moment. Don't love the film in any sense, but I have no real hate for it in my heart like a lot of people do, and yeah, that's why I've ranked it here. But on to the next film. Let's go to something a little bit more interesting. Boosh. Long live the king, Razdaman. Hamlet. How do I tackle this? This is a very sensitive subject matter that this film sort of involves, and if you know anything about the film, you'll know what I'm talking about. But yeah, this is fucking a depressing, miserable experience of a film, to be honest. I went into this expecting like a romance film or something, and I was dreading it because of that. I was like, fucking hell, I can't be arsed watching fucking the Shakespeare romance film. But no, it was a romance in a sense, but it was much less of that and much more of a grim, depressing type film, which was fucked up. I could appreciate that. We all need a grim, depressing type film sometimes, and someone has to make it. And if Chloe Zhao wants to make it, and not the Eternals, good on her. But I have problems with the film, unfortunately, even though a lot of it was really great, and I'll get into that. But I mean, just the atmosphere of the film, there was this sort of unsettling and weird unease that like tinged the whole film, and it made me feel uncomfortable and a bit like shit. But I think it kept me in the film, to be honest, and it sort of stopped me feeling bored, and it kept me relatively intrigued what was going on, at least for large parts of the film. I would be lying to say I never found myself like drifting off a little bit at certain points when it was just quite slow and and taking an atmosphere and things like that. It just failed to completely hold my attention for the whole thing, and maybe it just lacked a hook just to keep me fucking wanting to know what's going to happen next, because I'll get into it shortly, but after a certain peak of the film, it has less to hang on to, and it's sort of the main event of the film is finished in my mind. I guess the main event of the film is him writing Hamlet, which is I guess what the film surrounds. That process of him writing Hamlet to me is just so much less interesting than some of the other things that are going on earlier in the film. I think that first half's really, really good, to be fair, but it just sort of peters away in the second, which I'll get into a little bit more. I mean, I guess I'll just say it's not real, it's history. It's hardly a spoiler. It's most people know this going into the film, but be warned, this is sort of the cook of the film is that Shakespeare's son does die, and I think in a sense it's a beautifully staged thing, how Shakespeare could keep his legacy of his son alive through him immortalising him in this play Hamlet, which is obviously one of those iconic pieces of writing ever made. I've never actually read Hamlet. I was a Macbeth in school kid, and Romeo and Juliet. I've watched The Lion King though, so I know it, I think. But the story's been told so many times, like everyone sort of has a clue of what Hamlet is, so yeah, it is kind of a lovely thing to present that he's immortalising his son that tragically died of the bubonic plague, I think, the Black Death. So he died of some sort of plague thing. I'm not sure the exact dates. I think it was 18th century, I'm not really sure. I might be getting that wrong, but at the same time, it does feel a little bit weird and a little bit fanfiction-y in my head. Like, we don't really know if this happened and this was a real guy, and I just think it's a weird thing to adapt a real person's like most traumatic moments of their life, transferring it into this melodrama and just a very low and intimate and weird experience. Maybe that's fitting for Shakespeare, being like the king of melodrama and dramatism. Yeah, I don't know, but yeah, maybe that fits Shakespeare. But I just think, if my son died of the plague and I wrote a play about him and I was fucking very sad, if a few hundred years later Chloe Zhao made a film about my dying son, I'd be a bit soured. This is a real guy. It's not a fan fiction. I don't know. I feel a bit weird about that, to be honest. Even though it was executed with relative grace, it still feels a bit weird. And I'm just gonna jump right into the ending as well. I'm not gonna spoil exactly what the ending is, but basically I just, a lot of the tone of especially the early part of the film were just so low and depressing, and atmosphere building at the same time. It felt grounded, very much so, in a sense. And then this ending comes around and it did work for me. me. I think it was a relatively effective ending, but when I reflect on it, it was very melodramatic again, which is Shakespeare, but it didn't really match the tone of the rest of the film, and everything just felt a bit hammed up and, you know, overly sincere maybe, and I just don't think that fit the tone. It did tie up the narrative themes like pretty well. I think it needed something. You know, a depressing film like this needs to, it doesn't need to, but it's nice for it to go out on a more positive note, but it just didn't feel like it fitted the rest of the film for me, and I felt a bit unrealistic and ill-suited maybe for the tone of the rest of this film. Again, I say it was very grounded. It had a certain whimsy to it, the whole film, the whole atmosphere. It was very sort of floaty and, you know, like mythic at points. As like the main woman's framed as a witch, Jessie Buckley, who I'll get into later, I think done a really good job as like a witch character, and there's a lot of like thematic imagery, and, you know, like there's a dark cave, and then there's just the sun walking into the darkness. It's a sort of not psychedelic scene, but like a dreamy dream sequence sort of thing of presenting the sun dying and moving on to another world, which is really cool. I'm sorry, I guess I kind of have to spoil that, because so much of the themes of the film and just what I was trying to say is centered around that mid movie climax, and then again I just think it peaked there and it sort of withered out after the son's death, and I just couldn't stay hooked. But I don't think it found its feet after the big event, and then that scene was great though. I think I've mentioned it. That scene was like so well executed. The child actor who did that, I'm gonna search his name real quick. Jacoby Dupe, the kid's name is. This kid was generally, he brought up such a good performance, which is like all the kids were I think fine actors. They did the job well, and which is, you know, it's such a difficult role to do. The weight on these kids' shoulders in this film, it's such a thing to carry. But I think that kid's performance of the Hamnet kid was just like really surprisingly good. Like, you don't see kid actors sort of carry a scene like he managed to do in the film. So shout out to Jacoby, or if that's his name, I just Google it, I hope that's right. But yeah, even though I thought that kid done a great performance, I was not convinced of Paul Mescal as Shakespeare. In my mind, Shakespeare is like this old bald dude with like a weird 1700s haircut. When I look at Paul Mescal in this film, he's got like a bit of a Gen Z haircut going on in my mind. Like I could walk down to Concert Square now, and overnight I will see 10 Paul Mescal as Shakespeare's in Concert Square. So that just, it pulled me out of the film a bit. It didn't match the sort of atmosphere. Maybe that's what they had the hair like back then, I don't know, but in my mind it just didn't fit the atmosphere, and it felt like he was just there to get the girls into seats because there's a big sexy hunky man. That's not my opinion. I'm you know what I mean? A big sexy hunky man. They want to get girls in the seats so they all come and see this depressing film about Shakespeare's son dying. But yeah, I just was not convinced at all of Paul Mescal. On the other hand though, Jessie Buckley was, like, generally that's a best actress nod in my mind. She was excellent in this film. It was, along with the kid, for me though, her performance was like standout. She was in I'm Thinking of Ending Things that I've watched, and also Men. I think she was the lead in Men. I know she's always been great in things I've watched, but she really took her up a notch in this performance. She was incredible. She carried a lot of the film, even though Paul Mescal, maybe his character, took me out of it a bit. There's not really much I expect or necessarily want this film to win in the Academy Awards. I won't be upset, but I think Jessie Buckley, of all the actress performances that I'm aware of, or I've at least seen, I think that she really deserves at least a good chance of, you know, getting that Oscar, because she carried this film in her back a lot of time for me. And yeah, I'm hoping she gets more good roles in the future, because she's a great actress. I know I've touched on it slightly. I'll just sort of end it with this. All the sets and the set designs were, they seemed, again, I'm not an expert in history, but they seemed quite accurate to the time in my mind. I think they were. They probably filmed in some real life locations in across England, I would assume. But yeah, they did feel authentic and grounded to me, you know, and it was relatively impressive as well, you know, like anytime I can put my brain into that, like, old time, you can't even like comprehend how these sort of old timey ways live, because it's so much different to what you're living. And that's why I think I love a period piece a lot, and that's why I get excited when I see these sort of things, and feels very authentic to the time. But yeah, just putting these things onto picture, I love it, and you know, I respect the dedication to the craft and making this, you know, authentic, and it was shot so nicely as well. It was nice to look at the scenery, even like the old houses, like the old grim fucking abodes that they resided in. I don't know why I'm speaking like that. That's just really cool, and yeah, I'm into that, even if what was going on was quite depressing. One thing though, I'm not sure, maybe my brain's just so Robert Eggers pilled, but I'm not sure about the accents and the English that they use in the film, because in my mind they should be speaking, you know, like when you would watch a Shakespeare play and that you can't understand the word they're saying. So maybe it's a good thing, so I could understand the dialogue, that they didn't actually use the old-timey language. But I feel like I would have appreciated like a more authentic 18th century English sort of accent. It's probably best they didn't, just, you know, for audience reasons and making the film more accessible. But maybe it's at least accents. They sounded quite like modern British, a lot of it. I mean, that's a nitpick at the end of the day, so I'm not really, that's not going to affect my rating or anything. But again, I wasn't crazy about everything in the film. I've been very positive when I've talked about it here, but yeah, it did lose me at points. I feel like it dipped towards the second half of the film. I'm giving it a high 6 out of 10, maybe a low 7. It's sort of in that range, similar to Begonia for me, but I feel like Begonia just kept me hooked a bit better, which is why I'm ranking it a little bit higher. But yeah, I would recommend, if anything I've said sounds interesting to you, I'd check out this film, and it was better than I expected, to be fair. And yeah, we'll move on to the next film after that. Hamlet, not my favourite, but I'll give it like a nice humble recommendation if it sounds interesting to you. Thanks you, Shakespeare. You got the goats. Rule Britannia. No. Okay, next film.
According to all known laws of aviation, there is no way a beast shall be able to fly. His wings are too small to get his fat little body off the ground. The bee, of course, it flies anyway, because bees don't care what humans think is impossible.
I am so conflicted on Begonia. I don't know what to think of it. I sort of really liked it, but I sort of hate it in a weird way, and I'm sort of at a conundrum here. I'm conflicted. I don't really know what to feel at this point. I wasn't sure where to put it on my list. I've whacked it here. I'm not even sure where I've put it yet. I haven't edited that far into the future yet, but yeah, I sort of get the. I guess I'll introduce the film. Begonia. It's a Yorgos. Oh my god, how do you say his name? A Yorgos Lanthimos film. I'm a big fan of Yorgos Lanthimos. I've seen most of his other films, most of his major films. Killing of Sacred Deer, I think, is a good film. I think The Lobster is sort of a fucking classic at this point. I think The Favourite's probably the best film of that year. I love The Favourite so much. Same with Poor Things, one of the best films that's come out in recent memory. And then Begonia, to me, just feels like a step down in a sense. I sort of don't really gel with it, even though I had a good experience watching it, which is a really weird situation to be in. It's his first like proper film since Poor Things. He made Kinds of Kindness, which I haven't seen, which is like a compilation film of 3 different short films he made, I think, from what I'm aware of. But yeah, I'm not sure how well it executed the narratives it was trying to push and the things it was trying to say. And I think some of the things, I'm not sure if he was trying to say these things or not, and maybe it's because he's got me thinking, but I don't think I agree with a lot of them. The pessimistic view of the world it pushes. I understand that the point it was trying to make with sort of indoctrination and narratives being pushed through the internet and things like that. I just feel like there's ways that can be better executed, and I think it probably has been better executed in other films. Even, you know, think like Adolescence recently, a series. I think that it's executed that sort of point really, really, really well. But it just feels a bit confused with how it executes this, and again, it was a fun, well-made film, but I don't like how it left me feeling, I guess. I don't know if this is what the film is trying to say. I think it's probably trying to critique this way of thought, but I got the idea it was pushing a sort of, you know, humanity is like a plague on the planet, and I feel like this sort of theme is overdone. It's paralleled with like a civilization of like a beehive. And I can't really remember how exactly this was executed and compared, but it's sort of how the beehive gets corrupted and it starts to, you know, collapse because of certain, you know, outside influences, I suppose. I can't remember exactly how this. I watched it a while ago now, but I feel like this sort of idea of humanity being a plague on the planet, it's overdone, and it's often, you know, executed without real grace. And, you know, just my personal perspective, which, you know, fundamentally maybe I disagree with the ideas of a lot of people. You know, humanity are the planet. We are the species. We are part of the earth, just as any other creatures are. And I think maybe it was trying to say that as well with the alien narrative, which again I won't spoil the end. I think the end of the film is really interesting, but the alien narrative, and maybe it's critiquing this alien's narrative of humanity as being like a sort of worthless race. And also maybe it's better, it doesn't take like a direct side, it lets you make up your mind for yourself. But I just sort of, it left a sour taste in my mouth personally. But I can definitely see a different perspective if someone were to take that. But this is just how I felt. Obviously, this is, you know, my opinions on the film, especially if certain imagery that was shown towards the end of the film, I feel like he could probably take the exact opposite narrative from what I'm expressing. So maybe it's a deeper film than I give him the credit for at this point. But yeah, I think it's a more nuanced and intelligent take than I'm probably expressing. But it's just the message is so mixed up in my head that I just don't really know how to feel about it at this point, and it's hard to interpret just exactly what he was trying to say through the film, especially with the other narrative, the indoctrination through the internet narrative, which again the ending sort of undermines in a sense, but I like the ending, so again I'm conflicted on that. Just a lot of confliction going into my mind in this film. But I feel like even forgetting the messages, the main sort of issue I have with this film is that it doesn't really feel like it's pushing any boundaries or saying anything particularly unique or that's not been said before, whereas something like Poor Things or The Favourite, that felt like it was extravagant, it was over the top, it was doing something that I've never seen before, and Bugoni is not really doing that. It's a much smaller story, it's more compact and tight in a sense, but it's gonna stick with me less. It's probably my least favourite Yorgos Lanthimos film that I've seen myself, but it doesn't feel like it's something that's gonna stick with me too much, despite all my conflicting thoughts on it. Maybe that'll come back and I'll have a different view on it in the future, who knows, but maybe it is more of a reflective thing, looking inwards and expressing someone's own insecurities who's watching it, and rather than trying to say anything direct. And maybe that's my issue of interpreting a film, that it should be saying something directly and have a message, when maybe it is just more of a reflective thing. I'm not sure. I do think though where it was most effective was the sort of tragic comedy angle. There were moments, particularly towards the end, where the situation and imagery unfolds. It's deeply depressing when you think about like sort of what you're seeing on the screen, and it can fill you with like a great sadness, but it's tinged with this humour which you can't help but laugh at certain points. The presentation of some of like this such tragic things, it's so hilarious to me. I'm sort of sad laughing at the film. It's like I'm laughing, but what I'm seeing isn't really making me happy, which is again another conundrum. This film's like just a conundrum in my head. It's a very unique and hard to make to create emotion, I think. So it's interesting in that sense. I say this film wasn't as unique or groundbreaking as previous films by this director, but I think for the standard of films as a whole, it is quite a unique experience. You wouldn't expect most directors to make something of this sort. I just expect more from Yorgos at this point. So I think that's probably let him down a little bit just by how good his previous work's been. And I think that's both in terms of the subject matter it's dealing with and the execution. But again, I thought the ending sort of throws a spanner in the works in that sense, that it's like, yeah, this is a Yorgos Lanthimos film. And maybe because I already knew this big reveal at the end, which I'm not going to spoil, but I knew it before. Maybe that put the film into a different perspective for me and made it less shocking when something like that happens. Maybe made me question more what the filmmaker was getting at, having already known the big twist towards the end. I'm mixed on the twist, whether I like it or not, but I think it sort of had to happen, because it would have been just too straightforward if they didn't take a little sidestep towards the end and done something that you didn't expect. But anyway, I still love the direction, even if it was less groundbreaking. Yorgos loves them wide angle shots. It's almost like a fisheye lens at points. I'm not sure what type of camera it is, but he done the same thing in Poor Things as well, and I think The Favourite. Just really excellent filmmaking all around. The set designs, the costume, the casting, the colour grading, all the standard stuff that you would expect. It's performed well, but that's what you expect from Yorgos Lanthimos at this point. So it's not really surprising, and it's not really blown me away. And I think the three leads, Emma Stone in recent years, I think she's one of the best actresses working ever since, especially Poor Things. I was like, wow, she has so much range in her acting ability. She can do so many different roles. She sort of blows my mind every time she's in a film at this point. Jesse Plemons as well. He's been in a lot of films now. He seems to be being cast for everything. But yeah, he's a really good actor, and he does about what you expect for him. But overall, yeah, I'm sort of mixed. It's sort of a high 6, low 7 for me at this point. Great direction, but mixed with the content of the film, and that's what I'll leave it at, I think. Alright, shut back and blow your fucking head off, twat. So The Secret Agent 2025. Again, I'm a bit mixed on this film. It's a 2025 film directed by, God, how do I say this name? Kleber Mendonça. Kleber Mendonça Filho. I was going to say that. That's probably wrong. I apologise. It's a Brazilian film. Really interesting. Very interesting style. Very long. And I don't have this sort of negative thing about any long film, but I think if a film is long, it has to deserve that runtime. And to an extent, The Secret Agent does. But I have some critiques of it, and I have some things I loved about it, so we'll get into those now. So just a bit of a background on the film. It's a look at 1970s Brazil, and they were under some sort of authoritarian regime, or I don't know, it might be a military dictatorship or something like that. I know they had a lot of stuff going on in the 60s and 70s, sort of governmental restructuring, and again I don't know the historic details, but it's a really grim insight into this world that it feels very authentic. It feels like it really did exist. Again, the director being Brazilian, it feels like it comes from some level of real experience, and it's really interestingly framed in this new Hollywood style of like the 70s, which I think fits the setting of like 70s Brazil obviously very, very well. And I love how stylized it is. I think it complements the story a lot, unlike Frankenstein. And one thing I'll give this film so much credit for, the cast is brilliant. I think if anything, this film should win like best casting, because I didn't know most of these actors. Wagner Moura, I knew him from Civil War, which came out a couple of years ago now, and I think he was in Puss in Boots as well, so that's cool. He had so much fucking aura. That guy was cool as fuck in this film, and he does a lot of very subtle acting. It's not like hammy or over the top or anything. It's very, very grounded, even though the film's very stylized. I think that works really well. Yeah, again, I don't know most of these actors. It's the Brazilian actors, but like some great performances. Even like the old grandma character, it's like, wow, how do you find someone, sort of the equivalent of like an old Italian lady in like the Godfather or something. And I don't like comparing things too much, comparisons to FIFA Joy and etc, but like it felt like very believable for the time period. Sometimes period piece, I guess it's a period piece of the 70s, can cast people that are like current actors, and when you take them back to like the 70s or something, it's like you don't fit in here at all. You're a Gen Z, I can tell by the look on your face. But no, these actors felt so true to the time. Not to compliment to their performances as well, which I think were largely good. I can't think of a negative performance really. And it's complemented very well by the imagery. Really cool and weird imagery. There's this cat with it's like two heads and like three eyes, and it's like I don't know why this is in the film. Or like there's a leg. I can't even know how to start to explain the leg stuff, but like I don't know why this imagery is in the film. I'm not going to wrap my head around anytime soon, or the significance of these certain things. Maybe I'm just too disconnected from Brazilian culture, but yeah, it was striking, and it's memorable, and it's stuck with me to an extent. So that's really interesting. Any film that can have imagery that sticks with you is, deserves compliments. And this is complemented as well by just how well shot the film was. The framing was great, shot compositions. I think this is again largely influenced by the sort of new Hollywood style of the 70s, where it's just I can appreciate these images that he's showing me, even if I'm not fully connecting with the story at this point, which I'll get into a bit later. And I think probably large parts of just how well framed and composited the shots were carried the film for me to certain extents. And just the way the camera it moves and it cuts between scenes, it's quite electric, and it helps with the pace of the film. Even though if I have genuine problems with the pacing of the film, it's helped a lot by just how sleek the camera work is. It almost reminds me of point of like a later mid-era Martin Scorsese, like 90s like Goodfellas type of thing, or Casino. And it's like, wow, this is especially how it uses music and the transitions. Some really fucking sick transitions that sort of pay homage to the films of the past. Apparently, they have like side swipes, very 70s side swipes. Fucking A New Hope type shit. It just does feel like a love letter at points to these classic 70s films, but it's portraying a very serious situation and a great horrible thing that happened in the history of Brazil. For example, Jaws is mentioned a lot in the plot. It's actually quite relevant to the plot, even though I don't really understand some of the themes surrounding the shark and the leg and such. Even like showing scenes of The Shine and being played on the projector in the cinema and people watching it, and someone's getting sucked off, which is fucking fire. Even some of the more campy horror sort of stylings at the time were paid tribute to. So there's this one insanely campy and unexpected stop motion segment, which it could have took me out the film and be like, what the fuck are we doing here? But no, it worked. It was yeah, this is fun, why not just do this in the middle of a very serious and horrible film at times. Maybe not a horrible film, but what's portraying, what it's depicting is a horrible circumstances, but it sort of fits humor into that at points. It can make you laugh, which I appreciate for dealing with such serious subject matter. And even the more action scenes, there is a shootout in the film, and it's so well shot, and the execution was just so unexpected, and you know, when you see people getting shot, you don't expect it to typically look like that when you think about the sort of romanticism of the films. I don't know if it's accurate to how someone would actually look when they got shot or not, because I don't usually see people get shot. It was kind of fucking sick in both senses of that word. Like, it was gory and like quite horrible and grounded, but it's like, wow, this is quite cool actually how this looks. I don't know, maybe I'm sick for thinking that. It just felt like it was made by people with like a real understanding, you know, appreciation of cinema and its history, especially during the 70s, which I assume the filmmakers grew up watching. The film sort of shot around a carnival period for Brazil, which I guess is a period of a year, maybe like around, I think like around Easter or something, I could be wrong, where you sort of have carnivals and celebrations and parades and such. Because the soundtrack to this film is amazing. It has a really great score, I think, from what I've heard. I wish they used it more, but you know, especially around this carnival theme, there's a lot of really great music, and I personally, I love me some Brazilian music. I'm a big fan of like 60s bossa nova stuff, which is, you know, probably not something you'd expect someone to say, but I just love how all the music was used, and I think it should have been used more. It was almost sparingly used. When the credits started to run, I was just listening to the music, and I was like, I wish this was incorporated more into the film. But again, I've sort of hinted at it. I did have issues with the film. I had issues sort of following the film. I had issues keeping engaged. Maybe it's partially my own fault. I watched this when I was quite tired, and I also watched parts of the film on different days just because it's a long film and I'm a busy man. But yeah, I did find the plot at some points, probably because I'm not reading the text properly, and I'm zoning out at points. I'm not following the plot incredibly well, or maybe it was more or less complicated than I'm assuming in my mind. I'm not really sure. I still haven't wrapped my head around it fully, but maybe it's just like my horrible Gen Z TikTok attention span. This is how we are. But I did have to, you know, consult Wikipedia a couple times just to make sure I was keeping up on the plot, and even then I felt a bit confused at points, even though ultimately it made sense. But I just feel like some things could have been more clear, and it's like, I've respect for your audience. You know, Frankenstein was a bit too straightforward with some of the dialogue choices, and I'm glad it didn't do that, but I couldn't help it. But maybe it's an issue of pacing. I just couldn't follow some points of the film, and then again, that could be a me issue, that could be an execution of the film issue. It's hard to really say just from one perspective. I will say though, the opening scene, really great, really gets you into the film, really striking scene that sets the tone for the rest of the film, and I think that did help me, you know, carry me through what I would describe as like the next hour, which it sort of lost me a bit. It started to drag, and I was losing interest in the plot a bit, but then it just come back a bit towards like maybe like the hour and a half mark, and I've started to get into it a bit more, but it didn't feel like the plot escalated just enough for me to really, you know, get engaged. Maybe, you know, things just weren't getting emotion. It felt like quick enough, it wasn't getting hectic enough. Maybe in my head I was expecting a Scorsese film, and that's my own issue, but I do think that in some level this was intentional, just so it'd stay a bit more grounded and like realistic, and, you know, really paint a picture of what it was actually like at this time. It wasn't, you know, Goodfellas, it wasn't big fast energetic scenes, even though I do think it was quite energetically shot at points, as I mentioned before. But maybe this made it hit harder for some people, but for me, I would say the film's too long, and maybe aspects such as this is what actually makes the film more significant and poignant to certain people, and I can appreciate that, but I wasn't really feeling a lot of it. And like I said, my biggest complaint is probably just the runtime. You know, I love a long film. A long film's great for me. Everyone loves The Godfather, but for me to really enjoy a long film and be engaged throughout it, I have to really connect to the characters for it to work. And again, I thought the performances were great. I just didn't really connect with a lot of the characters on an emotional level, and I think that maybe hurt the film a bit for me. Maybe it's because I couldn't relate to it, because I'm very much not Brazilian. I'm very much from England, so maybe that it's not made for me, and I can understand that. It's not like mega long or anything. It's under 3 hours. It's 160 minutes. I did feel the length though, I can't lie. And when you don't really care about the characters, you know, this can, you know, make it just feel like a slog at points, even when the filmmaking is, you know, technically excellent and, you know, very, very interestingly made. I thought it was really interesting how they dealt with the ending. Again, I don't want to spoil it, but I'm, to be honest, I'm mixed on the execution. I think the ending worked, but I feel like the whole subplot surrounding that ending, and you'll know if you watch the film, it didn't feel like it was really needed to enhance the story, and it almost just gave a reason to give sort of a shock moment at the end in the epilogue of the film. Though I think this separate, almost subplot perspective thing, it does expand on some of the context of the film, which is probably important, and, you know, expand on some of its themes. But I'm not against it in theory. I'm just not really sure how well it complemented how well the story flowed and was paced, and maybe that's, you know, exacerbates so many issues I have with the runtime and the pacing overall. You know, even though I've been very critical at this point of the film, I didn't absolutely love it. I do want more films like this to be made. It's sort of film I would like to support, even though in execution I didn't absolutely fall in love with it. It does feel like a real tribute to the way of the new Hollywood way of filmmaking from the 70s. And though I think if this film caught me in a better mood, maybe if I was less tired, I probably would have loved it, but it wasn't made for that purpose, and just for that reason, unfortunately, didn't really click with me completely. And I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. Maybe if it catches me on a better day, I could bump her up on a rewatch, or maybe I'd go down the rewatch if I felt a slog more. I'm not sure, but I'm happy keeping it a 7 for now. Enjoyment experience probably closer to a 6. I'm happy with that. I think it's a good film, and I think if you have any interest in Brazil of this time, or just that sort of filmmaking, then I'd recommend it.
Hey, you're a good man for Molly. You're a good man.
So Train Dreams is a 2025 film directed by Clint Bentley, who I've not seen any of his other films. He made a film called Jockey, which was supposed to be alright, I think, like 2021. And it's led by Joel Edgerton, who's a solid actor. Felicity Jones is in the film as well as I guess his wife. I liked the film. I thought it was a good film, an enjoyable film. Tightly paced for a change. It's 100 minutes long, I think, so it's over an hour and a half. Again, I liked this film thematically. Compared to Begonia, I prefer this film's take on sort of human relationship and connection to nature and the world around us. You know, obviously Begonia had the whole beef thing. I thought this felt more sort of authentic and emotionally resonant with me, somewhat heartfelt. It is definitely a bittersweet film, but it never feels cynical. It just feels like a reflection of many people's lives and experiences over not just like recent times, but like over the whole history. It's set sort of end of the West, you know, sort of Red Dead Redemption era, sort of the old ways dying, the new ways coming in, which I think a lot of people can relate to. You know, it's sort of story of struggling to change with the times and things growing more complicated. It's sort of the basis of the story regards like the times changing and people struggling to adapt to the new way of life, which, you know, naturally comes as people get older, which is, you know, it's a cycle as old as time pretty much now. And again, the Red Dead comparisons, I mean, it's not just because it's a similarly timed setting, you know, it's end of the 19th century towards the modern age, you know, motor cars, the chainsaw at the end of the film, and dude's like, what the fuck's this? And I think this is a really interesting character exploration of, you know, people that really did exist and still exist to this day that just struggle to adapt to what is new, and every generation feels like the heart's being sapped out of the world and things are getting worse. But maybe that's true, maybe it's not. The generation before probably thought the same thing, and it's a really interesting cycle to me, and that's, I think, where I got the most enjoyment out of this film. I think everyone in life eventually will probably reach the point, maybe not everyone, but where just the world they grew up in and the world they know starts to feel like a different world. You know, the world they knew is just doesn't exist anymore, and new things don't make sense, and, you know, a sense of sort of losing your place in the world and trying to come to peace with you know, the reality of your present situation and where you belong. And, you know, it's a deeply human and, you know, interesting experience. But overall, I feel like the film's definitely ambitious, but it never really felt groundbreaking. It didn't feel like it treaded on new ground. The shooting style was definitely a choice. I don't personally love it. I think it felt a little bit bland at points and a little bit almost advertising, and it was sort of beautiful, but it was sort of inauthentic for how authentic the story presented was shown. So I do think it worked overall, but I'm not really a fan of its style of, you know, direction, the overall look of the film. At times it can take your breath away at points, but maybe it just feels too almost modern and sleek and real and practical for something. It's called Train Dreams. It's trying to present the world in a sort of dreamy and surreal way, and I think it does feel surreal. It achieves its goal of achieving that surreality, but the imagery that the film conjures in my head, it doesn't really match this. It's a real like hard dichotomy to unpack, because it is shot very, very sleekly, but it just feels surreal. It's a really, I'm not sure how that really works. Maybe this works in a weird sort of way that you wouldn't expect, you know, and maybe that, you know, overall visual palette it lacked the romanticism that I'm used to in film, and maybe that's a problem. You know, that's just that sort of cinema I prefer. I did find it to be quite a valuable experience. I think it'll stick around in my head for a bit. again, I love the themes, and I connected a lot with the themes. I never really felt fully connected to everything that was happening, just despite the fact, you know, I sort of liked what it was trying to say. It didn't really completely hit me. I know a lot of people had a very emotional reaction to this film, and I just can't relate. Maybe I'm soulless, maybe I'm a psychopath, who knows. It's a low 7 out of 10 for me, but a lot of people really enjoy it, and I can respect that. Next film. Once I lived a life of a millionaire, sucking all that pussy, I didn't have a care, taking all my friends for a real gay time, drinking poo, eating poo.
So as someone who would say they are quite a big fan of the old Delta blues, and is equally a fan of some of that old Irish folk music, you'd think this film would be perfect for someone like me, but unfortunately, one thing I do not love is vampires particularly. They're not a big thing in my life. I'm not a big vampire fan, but that's just me being a vampire hater. No offense to the vampire fans out there. If you don't know Sinners by now, which you probably should, it's hardly a spoiler. It's basically the concept of the film. The first half's sort of more of a period drama. It's very atmospheric, and, you know, building this world up of you know, the Delta and the blues musicians that existed in this time, and lots of themes surrounding, you know, Christianity and things like that, and oppression. And the second half of the film shares similar themes, sort of oppression against, you know, the Irish and black communities historically in the old US of A. And I think that in concept this is a really good idea, and for a lot of people it's worked really well. For me, not too much, and I really wish I connected with this film a bit more, because I think it is actually a great film. It's a brilliant film. I've got issues with, but I think it's great, and everyone should go out and watch it. And I absolutely love the first half of this film when it's more focused on, you know, this sort of world building and the blues players. And I like what that half of the film is going for a lot. I think it fumbles it a bit in the second half, in my opinion. It becomes like a schlocky vampire slasher thing, which I think is fine and I think is fun, but it just wasn't as, you know, energetic and exciting as that sort of period of the film should have been for me. I just didn't connect with it fully. I don't think the action was particularly like groundbreaking or amazing to watch, and the actual schlocky violence wasn't really there as much as I remembered it, because I did actually watch this film twice. I watched it in the cinema when it came out, and I've rewatched it again for this video, and I was just, I guess, anticipating it was coming the second time, because I didn't know the first time that this was going to happen in the film. Anticipating it was coming, it sort of left an expectation where it's just everyone's gonna go fucking crazy, and it'll, you know, shit hit stuff on and all this crazy violence and, you know, vampire malarkey. But it wasn't actually that crazy when I watched it a second time. It's just like, okay, this is happening now, and it feels kind of tame in a sense, and there's a lack of weight to a lot of the action in my mind, and the violence isn't particularly enthralling for me personally, even though I think it is good. I'm not saying the second half of the film is bad by any means. I just don't think it lives up to what the first half of the film is really building up. Again, in concept, you know, the sort of idea of a classical blues Delta musician type of guy going face to face with the devil and having a big scrap with it in this fucking barn and playing the blues music and the fucking you know, it's a great concept in sort of writing, but I don't feel like it executes that as well as it could, and as much as I really wanted it to. You know, maybe I feel a bit of a lack of cohesion between them two parts of the film personally, where it sort of sours the first half of the film a little bit for me. When I think about it, I remember all the crazy stuff that happens in the second half, but I was really loving a lot of the, you know, the smaller character building moments that was happening in the first half of the film, and that do continue into the second half, but takes it from a different angle where it's a lot less grounded, but it just gets a bit silly, which, you know, I like silly, but it just doesn't work for me for some reason. Maybe that's just too much. Maybe the runtime of the sort of the climax action sequence section of the film is just sort of too long, and maybe it should have been, you know, 2/3 sort of world building and it being a period drama, and then the last third where it, you know, shit hits the fan and it just really amps up all the energy, but it feels like it doesn't really ever hit its stride completely. Yeah, that's sort of how more classical films are typically structured, where there's a lot of build up, and that can be, you know, boring for a lot of people. I understand that, but there's a lot of build up, and that sort of leads to the climax hitting so much harder. But in this, it's kind of just like, it sort of peaks a lot around the middle section of the film, around a certain scene, and then it sort of tries to keep that height, that sort of high intensity, and it just doesn't really hold it for me personally. And I guess maybe I just don't love the execution of how that half of the film is handled. There's a weirdly underwhelming feeling to it, even though it is so chaotic and, you know, violent and crazy. I just feel like these scenes should have, you know, hit me more and been more emotionally impactful, especially since I've been sitting with these characters for so long, and so many of them are getting like fucking mauled by vampires. Like, I didn't really care that much for some reason. For me, the second half of the film drags so much because of that, because I just didn't really care as much as I really expected to about what was going on. Although I think I could appreciate that second half of the film more after a second watch. My first time watching it, I did not see it coming at all, and I was very surprised and like, oh my god, when all the vampire stuff happens. But I kind of didn't want that, and I kind of wanted it to continue in the direction it was originally going. But again, it does work. I think the theme of the devil looking over this character the whole film, it does thematically flow very well. I just don't think it worked for me for some reason. Maybe in execution, in feel, I don't know. That's not saying I didn't enjoy this film. There's a lot to love about this film. I've watched it twice now, and I've placed it so high on my list. I don't want to disparage it too much, because I do think it's a great film, and I would recommend watching it. It doesn't hit me like it's hitting other people for some reason, and I think that's a slight annoyance to me, because I do really like the film, but I don't love it, and a lot of people love the film, and I just don't really get that. I mean, the highlight for me of the whole film is that sort of middle transition scene of when he starts to play the blues, and you can see sort of all the eras of music that sort of evolved into the blues and evolved from the blues, and all the people that's joined in this music in this one section of the world, everything sort of comes together, right? And I think all the film comes together as well as the sort of plot of, all the different eras of people coming together, the dead and the living and the not yet fucking existing people for the future. Everything just kind of connects. I think that's a really beautiful thing, and it was executed with such suave and elegance that even like with fucking people twerking in the corner, it's funny, but it also feels, it doesn't take you out the film and it's like, oh, this is silly. That's again me the peak of the film, and it's a really long like one shot, and it just looked really great, and I think the film's worth watching just for that climactic scene, and then I think it does dip after that. But again, I've mentioned that earlier. I do think second time watching as well, I did pick up sort of maybe what the film was trying to say, or what I'm sort of interpreting from it. When I first watched the film, I was just so confused what they were sort of trying to get at. I sort of I picked more things up on the second watch. I think it is sort of about how sort of cultures are being absorbed into this sort of machines of profit and commercialism and stuff. The sort of shared trauma between communities, even though ultimately they were pitted against each other. Marginalised groups like the Irish Americans and the Black Americans being sort of pitted against each other, because they share so much in common, really, but they don't really understand this, and they should be fighting together against these sort of wealthy elites, or like it's represented as the KKK in the film, or these hateful sort of groups there to bring them down and try and but ultimately this idea of them coming together ultimately through what is the devil and through becoming vampires is what is presented in the film. But we're all sort of guilty of absorbing cultures and sitting on Spotify and listening to blues music that wasn't particularly made for you, and then it being repurposed over the time, and bands like British bands like Led Zeppelin, or even like the merely like rock and roll British Invasion, Beatles, Rolling Stones bands that sort of took that music and repurposed it and commercialised it and sold it. But ultimately I do think that was beneficial for them sort of communities to be more accepted into the world we know today. Yeah, but all this music, the sort of, it's presented as blues or Irish folk music, that sort of it's built on pain, and it's being commercialised today, and it was being commercialised at that time. It was profiting from the pain of marginalised communities, which I think it's sort of what it's trying to say to an extent, and that's sort of shown through how the devil sort of absorbs all these cultures into one big mishmash of everyone sharing the same thoughts, and ultimately it becomes like a hive mind of these sort of shared ideas and shared trauma, in a sense of all these communities sort of coming together. But again, I'm not quite sure about the message it's trying to present there, but I've got sort of like fragments of what it's trying to say to an extent. I think the vampires are like somewhat like metaphorical of sort of the systematic oppression that comes onto these sort of communities. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot to digest there, and I'm still, my thoughts aren't fully cohesive around what the film's actually trying to say, but it's something around there. I'm sort of picking up to an extent what it's getting, and I'm sort of interpreting it my own way, which is interesting. I can appreciate people being able to take their own message from the film, which is always nice. And I will say as well, just on a filmmaking perspective, some of it's really good and some of it let me down a little bit. I think there's the scenes where Michael B. Jordan sort of interacting with Michael B. Jordan, because they're all ultimately playing the same character. Michael B. Jordan and Michael B. Jordan, I think they have a lot of good chemistry together. It's been done a million times in the past, but it's so seamless how these two characters interact, even though they are the same person. It's quite impressive how they do that. I know I mentioned the Warner scene before. A lot of good filmmaking, but also I don't love love how it's shot for some reason. It just didn't look amazing to me. I feel like in the frame there's just so much empty space that's just not being used to its full extent. You know, the images look sort of too large, and then the characters sort of occupy a small space of this, which I don't think particularly looks really good to me. But I'm not a cinematographer, that's it, you know. I could be getting that wrong, but that's just how I feel. That's just a bit of a nitpick from me. I do think some of the performances in this were quite good as well. You know, Hayley Steinfeld's always great in anything she's in, because she's a very attractive lady. LeBron Michael B. Jordan, you know, he was pretty decent in the film. I have no complaints. I think he done a pretty good job of balancing these two characters. I could get confused between which one was which when they took the hats off at points, but that's just me. I don't know. But I think the real standout performance for me personally was probably Jack O'Connell as, you know, the main vampire dude. I think he brought a very convincing performance, and I think that was sort of the highlight for me. You know, the sort of energy he brought to his role. And the Preacher Boy character as well. I've never seen him, the actor, in anything before, I don't think. I thought he did a pretty good job. You know, he wasn't my favourite character in the film. I thought he was a little bit bland maybe, but I think he done a perfectly fine job of doing what needs to be done for the plot. I've talked a lot about sort of themes and such, and I'm still a bit conflicted on how much I love the film, but I do think it's a really great film. It's a great watch. It's a really, you know, enjoyable experience. Lots of action, and, you know, interesting themes it's sort of going for around depression and such. But yeah, anyway, I love the blues. You know, as you mentioned, any time sort of music was used in the film, it was used so well. And they were my favourite scenes of the film, sort of when they were just playing music, whether that's the Irish folk singers singing, you know, Rocky Road to Dublin, which was sort of the mirror scene of the blues being played in the barn. Yeah, I thought all that was really great, and I will leave it at that. Solid 7 out of 10 for me. Yeah, I would recommend the film. And we'll go on to our number 3 spot. Let's go. Boo!
Singing the blues and sucking up poos.
Okay, we're in territory now, top 3, where if any of these films win, I'll be perfectly content. I think all these films are fucking pretty magnificent, to be honest. So a third place, it's just by a touch between third and second, but I have put Sentimental Value by a director's name who I cannot pronounce. Joachim Trier, maybe? Joachim Trier? I don't know. He's a very Norwegian man, and it is a Norwegian film, so I guess, yeah, another foreign film in contention for Best Picture. I love this film a lot. This comes after the last film he made, The Worst Person in the World, which is another film that I really, really loved, and I think I do just edge that film slightly towards this one, just because I think just overall the humour of that film sort of worked better for me. That was probably my favourite film of that year, and it's honestly been up there, but these top 3 is such a close bunch for me. It does seem like to me, even though the film's very different, that he's sort of building on the style of direction that The Worst Person in the World sort of went for, and it sort of takes that to another level, even though ultimately I prefer the other film. But this is probably just a more tight and well-made film, I would say. But yeah, I do just overall just think this was such a great execution of the idea the director was going for. It's a very grounded topic, and to sort of make it in this way that keeps it so interesting and sort of fresh as it's going on, and, you know, not really pulled out of it. It's not too grounded to the point where, you know, it's sort of losing you. I was completely invested through the whole film, and it's just mainly just character relationships. The sort of heart of the film is the sort of, you know, father-daughter character dynamics that exist through most of the film, and that's sort of what it's exploring, and sort of the relationship between, you know, parents, and then also sort of a very lived-in area, a house, which I'll discuss more momentarily. But also the father's a director, and he's sort of neglected his family in his pursuit of art and making very, very good films from it's kind of being presented. And I think that's just an interesting, you know, the sacrifices people make for their own family to make such pieces of art, even though ultimately the father character is an arsehole for doing that. So I do think Stellan Skarsgård as the dad was, you know, he's basically excellent. So even he can be in a bad film and he'll still, you know, bring out a good performance. I don't know what to say her name. I'm going to say Renée Redzepi. She was also leading The Worst Person in the World, and she was very good in that film as well, and she's very good in this film. I'm not sure if she's got a Best Actress nod, but she had a really strong performance in this film. And Ella Fanning as well, which was a surprise for me. I didn't expect her to be in the film, but I think she was a really interesting choice. I like the sort of, it bounced between these English and Norwegian scenes, and it felt appropriate when that was happening. I didn't really feel like a bit of a whiplash when it sort of switched language. I felt like there was a good meaning for that as well, so that helps. But yeah, again, for a film that's a lot of just, you know, there's no action or anything. There's a lot of walking through rooms and changing environments and talking, and some extravagant scenes regarding the sort of the dance class that the lead is taken, and also I guess the sort of cinema angle which the father is taking. You know, there's some sort of really extravagant, interesting scenes sort of sprinkled in there, but mainly it is a lot of sort of talking in rooms and such. But yeah, there's such a good range of sort of shooting techniques, depending on the scenes and the tones of the scenes. And you know, I especially loved how there's scenes where they sort of go into the past, sort of looking at the bloodline of the family, which is a really interesting theme that the film explores. But looking into the past, and it feels like you're watching an old film, the way they've executed it. So it's very grainy, and it looks like it was shot on film. I'm not sure how exactly they executed it, but it looked really good. And it's like, okay, we can make films that look fucking beautiful like this still. So you know, I'm just impressed of how well executed that sort of thing was. And even at like the very start of the film, it's showing one of, I think it was the older film of the director character, and it's sort of like one of his, like, you know, magnum opus, masterpiece auteur films, and that looked so good. It was such a great period of the film that sort of added to this like dynamic nature of the film, which, even though it is, you know, a very simple concept in a sense, there's so much else going on surrounding this, and I think that was really good. And I love the house as well. I know it's obviously it's a cliche to say like, oh, the set was a character, the house was a character, but it really did feel like a character in itself. The way it sort of is shown to evolve over time of them. Again, the past scenes, but also, you know, how ultimately there's so many memories and feelings ingrained in this house for the characters that, you know, they just feel like they need to get out of it at some point because it's so overwhelming. And then ultimately how that concludes, you know, I don't really want to spoil it, but the ultimate fate of the house is so, it's like any character arc, but it exists for a set, which was, you know, really interesting for me. But yeah, it does also just really feel, most of the sets when you need to do, mainly the house, but it does just feel lived in and real, and like the characters really like engaged with this environment through the whole life, which was so interesting. And I think with them past scenes, there is sort of a romanticism of the past that they're trying to sort of do, but it does feel like they're trying to say something with that, of sort of, you know, this is how we're sort of visualising the past through these old cinema lenses of like film grainy and like romanticized shots. But, you know, there's a truth that exists within that, of how we're seeing the past versus how it actually was, and the sort of rose tinted modern glasses that we wear when we're looking at these sort of things. And the whole plot line with, I guess, I think it was a dead mum character, if I'm remembering correctly, and sort of there's the subplot that goes on there. It's so like, it's almost more interesting to me than the main film, but it also adds to this sort of house as a character sort of idea. But yeah, I just think that's really interesting, and I think Joachim Trier, if that's how you say his name, just has a real knack for sort of making these very authentic and like lived in and real sort of character dynamics and experiences. And I think it's helped a lot by the sort of set design and how the film's produced. But it's very grounded, but like the title of the film said, it's got a real sentimentality at the heart of it, and it's a very, you know, emotional experience for both the viewer and the characters in the film. And I sort of mentioned how believable and authentic these sort of character dynamics feel, and especially between the daughters and the father. Just everything, just how all the characters speak to each other just feels so, you know, well done and realistic, and just, but with there's still a tinge of, you know, cinema and romanticism and sentimentality. And I think that's just a very good balance he got there, and I think it just makes the film so much more poignant for me personally. And there's also like a lot of other smaller things to note, sort of a lot of funny commentary around sort of the state of cinema. There's like the Netflix scenes of sort of him getting like an interview with the new lead actress he's got. This film was written in Norwegian and they're trying to film it in English because of outside factors and sort of the integrity of making art, and sort of the way the old ways die, and how they try and like get an older cinematographer, and it's like, this guy cannot do it anymore, he's too old, he can't walk properly, you know, sort of a generational shift in the way cinema is looked at and the way it's sort of executed. You know, it's not the 70s anymore. Francis Ford Coppola's not taking people out to the jungle to make his film and fucking chopping pigs' heads off and shit, you know. That's a different time, and not necessarily a better or worse time, but just a different time. And I think that's a really interesting sort of view it takes, that, you know, it's very self-aware in that sense of sort of the state of cinema. It's sort of commentating on that in a film, which, you know, it's been done, but I think it was done in a very interesting way. And yeah, also the dynamics between sort of the industry and these different characters. There's a sort of daughter who just like, I don't want to be in your films, I just want to do my little dance class, little performance. And then the dad who's just like not washed up, but an older director who's, you know, past his day, and he's made great films in the past, but he's sort of retired in a sense, and he wants to come back and make one last, you know, magnum opus for him to go out on a high. And whether that's, you know, even worth doing, if it's gonna like sacrifice what you have with your family. Also, there's a sort of weird thing of like, you know, maybe it brings the family together. It's in some ways the sort of, you know, the cinema, which I'm not sure about that message or not. I'm not sure if that's what they were going for, but I was a bit
I'm sort of mixed on that interpretation, but and I suppose there's some like commentary and satire on that, in a sense of just like auteur directors, and and then the major pop actors, which is sort of Ella Finer's character, and the dynamics between these people, and it is making fun of them a little bit, and it's like trying to make them look silly, I think, but also maybe putting them on a bit of a pedestal at some point. I'm not sure, I'm still a bit mixed on how exactly I feel about that, and I think it wraps up really well with the ending. I'm not going to spoil, but it does sort of wrap up the plot line of the house as a character, and it's sort of, it's a nice little bow. It wraps up all these characters' stories while leaving it somewhat open-ended for, how these relationships will go on afterwards. But overall, yeah, I just think it was, in general, the film was such a great script, so well executed, lots of themes, lots of, concepts sort of bringing up, and I think it works on all these avenues. I would put it at a very high 8 at the moment, I think, a high 8 to a sort of lower 9, but yeah, this is one of my favourite films of the year, probably one of my favourite films of the decade, up there with The Worst Person in the World as well, so I'm really excited to see what Joachim Trier is doing next, if I'm saying his name right. But yeah, on to number 2 now. Let's go. And you see, I'm living the dream. I'm getting the cream. I live on a theme. I'm living a dream. It's Marty Supreme. It's Marty Supreme. Marty Supreme forever and ever. Marty Supreme. I love Marty Supreme. Marty Supreme was a great movie. I don't know why I'm speaking like that. So Marty Supreme is the latest Josh Safdie banger that came out. It's following his last film, which was Uncut Gems, I think, which I loved Uncut Gems. It feels like years ago that came out now, but Adam Sandler should have won Best Actor, or at least been nominated. That guy should have an Oscar. Adam Sandler's one of the greatest living actors. But yeah, Marty Supreme, I love this film. I'm so happy I love this film as much as I did. I'm not sure it's my favourite Safdie film. I haven't watched that rock one that came out with Benny. Is it Benny Safdie? I think it is. I get mixed up with the Fine Bros. I mean, I don't think I'm going to like that as much, but Uncut Gems, Good Time, and this, it's like three great films there, I can't really complain. And I just thought Marty Supreme, he had a massive advertising campaign, by the way. I think it flopped a little bit at the box office, which is sad, but it's to be expected with this kind of film. It's not the greatest mainstream appeal of a movie. But yet, Timothée Chalamet was doing everything trying to get this film promoted, and fair play to him. I'm glad it's got nominated. I'm glad it's getting some recognition, because it's a brilliant film, and Uncut Gems didn't get that recognition, and it should have got that recognition, so this is sort of course correction for the Academy. Yeah, he even had that song with SD Kid, who's from round our way, and that was a funny thing he done. So yeah, Bob Dylan, one year next year he's a Scouse rapper, so that's exciting for him. But yeah, anyway, getting into the film, I thought, it was a really it's a great twist on that sort of, I guess the sports drama and also biopic genre. I think that this is based on a real guy. It's sort of a biopic in the same way, like, I guess Goodfellas is sort of a biopic, but a really good twist on like the sports drama genre that it's been done to death at this point, even though I love some of them, What's that one with Tom Cruise and I can't remember. Jerry Maguire. That's it. I love Jerry. It's a strange thing to compare it to, but I love Jerry Maguire. Anyway, yes, I really liked the twist. The twist on the sort of story narrative that these films typically go for. Sort of he's usually an underdog and he come back. Rocky Balboa come back and doing over his win, but they sort of come out on top in the end. Which I'm not going to spoil the film, but you can sort of guess by the Safdies of the films how these sort of things are executed and conclude. But yeah, it was like, it was a big stressful mess of a story at the end of the day, and I just couldn't look away from it. That's in a good way. It's a downward spiral pretty much. So someone sort of trying to thrive and reach these goals, sort of a whiplash type of, trying to be the greatest, and there's the sort of consequences of that and what you leave behind, and that's very much explored through this Marty character who I'll talk about a bit more later. But it was it kept stressing me out, the film. It probably took me out of it and I had a bit of a negative experience because of this, but I just couldn't take it at points. I had to just pause the film and like take a breather and just get on fucking reels and wash my brain, because I was getting a bit stressed, and I was like, fucking hell, man, I can't deal with what this Marty dude's up to right now. Fucking stressing me out, man. But yeah, the primary setting of the film is the 1950s New York, and that's just a setting I just cannot get enough of. I think 1950s, any New York period, but especially like older New York, there's so much personality you can inject into film set in New York, and that's, I think, why every film's set in New York, because or at least American film, because there's just so much personality. It's so dense, it's so
it's so lived in and real, you know. And this is just me glazing New York at the moment, you know. It's been, you know, everyone glazes New York. Fucking yeah, New York. What a setting for this sort of film. I think it's great. But it never really feels like the 1950s, and that could be something negative about the film, but I think that sort of works in its favour, sort of. You know, there's a lot of music that they use that's sort of more modern. It sort of reminds me of how Challenges uses that sort of electronic score and music. You know, it's very separate from what you're expecting from a narrative of the film for the story to be complemented by this sort of music. It makes the film feel less like a period piece and more just a story that could be sort of set at any time, and then the setting's just a setting. It doesn't need to, you know, take forefront over what the film's actually trying to say. And I love a period piece, so I've got no problem with period pieces. Just, it would have took away from this film if it was just framed as a period piece. It avoided that problem really well. It ultimately, as I mentioned, it's a character study on this Marty Supreme character, and that's where most of it. My takeaways from the film came surrounding the sort of the qualities and the inner sort of turmoil of this character. And I think in terms of, you know, Timothy Shambalaba Ding Dong's performance, this is probably his best I've seen him in. I've seen him in quite a few things at this point, but nothing's really blown me away. But this film, I feel like this sort of cements Timothy as a serious actor at this point, which he was already going for in a way, and I feel like he was already a very well received actor. But for me in this film, it's like, wow, he has the chops, you know, he has the Marty Risma. What the fuck does that mean? And you know, that's shifted how I see him as an actor at this point. I'm sort of excited for what he works on next, just because I know he has interesting roles like this in him, and that's not fucking Willy Wonka. You know, I'm very split on Timothy Chalamet films. You know, he has the Doom films, and now he has Marty Supreme. But for every Marty Supreme, he's had like a Willy Wonka, or you know, like Little Women as well. I've got no problem with Little Women. I haven't watched it. That seems like a girly film for girly girls. But you know, I was sort of trying to, in my mind, trying to appeal to the female gaze a little bit. And that's fine, he can do that. But like, he was just a pretty face in my head, and now he's sort of shifted into a kind of a fucking cool actor, even though he was still absolutely mogging me the whole film, even with like the prosthetic makeup on and making him have an acne and try and look ugly. But you know, he's a little pretty boy. He can never be ugly. I'm sorry Timothy. I need to stop disrespecting you like this and saying strange things. But I'll move on from Timothy as a visual icon. Yeah, his character was like a real fucking unlikable, horrible dickhead through the film. But somehow the film, you know, a lot of people probably disagree with this, but the film did trick me personally. It's just how my mind works. It tricks me into rooting for him. I wanted him to succeed. For some reason, I wanted him to succeed, even though he's a knobhead. A lot of films like this, even if they are fucking horrible people, if the film puts me in their perspective, instantly I'm fucking going all out for them, you know. That's probably a flaw in my character, but as soon as I'm in their perspective, you know, we fucking take on the world, you fuck everyone over. And I don't know why my brain works like that, and that's not a good thing, but I still hated him, and that's the key takeaway. And I took a lot of stuff away from his character. He was a very self-destructive sort of, you know, narcissistic guy, very opportunistic, but surprisingly at points, you know, he gets his own way. He's very charismatic and smart when he really needs to be, and brute forcing these situations to get his own way, which you know, it does work up until the point where he sort of starts to push it too far, and everyone sort of catches up to him, and it starts to bite him in the arse a bit. Everything he's done a bit, I mean a lot. Like it's ultimately, that's the narrative of the film, I suppose. But yeah, it is hard to see him as a redeemable character. But again, he has some positive traits. I think he does have a caring side to some extent. He does things because he's not entirely self-serving. He does care a little bit sometimes about other people, but he comes first, and then his friends can sort of come seconds. You know, if he gets his own way, then he also wants to help other people, which, yeah, he's not a great guy, but again, redeemable, caring side, and his actions ultimately lead to people he cared about being harmed, which that says a lot. You know, he's the true grifter of his time as well. It doesn't really, I don't want to spoil it, but it doesn't fully pay off for him. It does, it's in a sense, you know, I'm not going to spoil it, but yeah, he has some moments. You know, yes, there's some ups and some downs, like, you know, everyone does in this life of ours. Yeah, but even with the arsehole main character, the film is still so, it was fun, you know, it was charismatic, it was energetic, it kept the energy up, and even though I wanted to look away just because of how stressed I was, you know, I had to turn it back on every time because I needed to know what's going to happen. Another surprising cast, and Tyler, the creator, I had no idea he was in this film, and then I see him and I'm like, oh no, this is going to be a disaster. But you know, he was actually quite good. It's the first acting role I've ever seen him in. I was pleasantly surprised. I thought he was fun and he brought a lot of energy to his scenes. And you know what? Maybe just cast Tyler the Creator in more films. Yeah, he was pretty good. And something else I picked up on. I'm not really sure where to go with this, but obviously with the character of Marty being Jewish, I'm treading on ice a bit here. There's a lot of sort of themes and imagery based on that Jewish heritage I sort of started to pick up on, which I'm not sure what it was trying to say. I'm not sure the message there, but there was something there. For example, as a dog that's a reoccurring character, which sort of gets up to some antics with Marty, and I guess Marty sort of his selfish actions bring some harm onto this animal. Again, not to spoil anything, but the dog had the name Moses, which obviously has some relation to Marty's Jewish heritage. Did I say that right? The dog was called Moses. Moses and Marty and Jewishness. That's where I am. So there's some relation there, and it feels like most of these sort of the more intense scenes of destruction and violence sort of follow this Moses dog, which I think it's trying to say something. I'm not sure what it's trying to say, but in my head it's something to do with Marty's disconnection and disrespect at some points to his heritage and his upbringing, and who he is as a person, and not fully accepting his role in the world and wanting to be something more. As well, he goes to Egypt at one point on sort of one of his tours or something, and he takes a chunk of the pyramid and he says something like, this is ours, we built it. Obviously the slaves from Israel or wherever, they built the pyramids in the Bible. I'm not a big Bible head. I might be getting that a bit wrong, but the Israelites, they allegedly built the pyramids as slaves. So that's a hype moment for the Jewish community, I think. And again, I've already said a lot, but I don't want to spoil the climax of the film, but I did love the climax of the film. I loved the big moments. It sort of shown how shallow his sort of pursuit was in the end, and he was sort of just doing it for his own self-pride rather than anything more meaningful than that. But just how that last scene was shot, and I don't want to spoil it, but it just felt rather epic. That word's been ruined, but it did feel like a big epic scene, and it was shot some paced so well. It was like electric. These two fellas absolutely going at it. It almost felt like a Leone Western at some points, of just these two of the greatest, two absolute aura machines going at it, even though at the end of the day it's fucking lame because they're playing it's ping pong, it's table tennis, you know what I mean? It just sort of makes it less cool, but it's framed in this cool way where it's like, what the fuck's going on? It's ping pong. But yeah, I sort of love the overwhelming sort of romanticism of this, and it sort of makes you reflect on what's actually happening, and that it's just ping pong at the end of the day. So I think I'll leave it at that though. I was a big fan overall of Marty Supreme. I'm very excited to see both the Safdies, but especially Josh at this point I've up next, and Timothy as well. I'm interested in the projects he's going to be taking in the future. I hope he takes more sort of inventive, interesting roles in the future, but yeah, he was really good in this, and I'm a big Marty Supreme lover. Yeah, Marty Supreme forever and ever. We love Marty Supreme. My dog's called Marty. We love my dog Marty. And my old dog was called Oscar, so maybe Marty will get the Oscar today. Yeah. High 8 out of 10, low 9, somewhere around there. Fucking sick. We love Marty Supreme forever and ever. Number 2. Now to number 1. Wee.
Otherwise, it's just one battle after another in this world.
Okay, so putting one battle after another at the top of my list at this point, it's hardly a brave thing to do, and what I'm going to say about it is also it's not groundbreaking. It's not a new take, because it's pretty well known at this point that this is probably one of the all-time films that's come out at least in recent years. It's heavy glaze I'm giving it, I know, but it felt like a monumental film in my eyes, and in my eyes it's an upper tier of Paul Thomas Anderson's, because it's being so well received. People are trying to be like, oh no, it's not actually that good, but for me it is just pretty much that good. I think it's one of my favourite Paul Thomas Anderson, who I think is one of the best living directors around, to be honest. Again, that's not a groundbreaking thing to say, but I don't enjoy all of his films. I love Punch Drunk Love, I love There'll Be Blood, I love Boogie Nights. Boogie Nights is a classic. I love a lot of his films, but like I wasn't a big fan of The Master. People love that film, so it's not like every single film I'm just glazing heavily. His last film I was a bit disappointed with, Licorice Pizza. It never really clicked with me. I never really got into it. This sort of cements him in my head as one of the best in the business at the moment. What he done with this film, it's insane. I don't know how he pulled it off, to be honest. It's trying to be so many things at once, the film. It's it's a thriller, it's a drama, it's a really good comedy, actually, a revolution film, all sorts of other things it's tapping into. And I feel like when you try and mix too much, he's trying to do too many things at once, he's trying to be too many things. A lot of times films like this they fall apart, but I think somehow it nails the landing. I don't know how it succeeds being all these different things, and I don't really have any strong criticisms against any of the angles sort of went with. Maybe my only negative view at this point is that maybe it can be seen as, you know, as a sort of, it's a reflection of the world we live in. Like, you know, pretty much every single piece of art, piece of writing, anything that's ever made is a reflection of the world we're living in. But this is especially so. It's, you know, it's commentating on the time we're currently living in. It feels very grim and, you know, bleak and quite moody, but I think that's just, again, a reflection of the state of a lot of the world, especially the state of America. You know, I don't personally see the film as, or modern times even, as you know, as grim as this film portrays. But it's a good thing to show, I think. You know, even though I don't see the world like this, I feel like it's a possible portrayal of how the world can become if we go down certain avenues. If, you know, if we make certain choices of our voting, if certain people get into too much power, if certain, you know, corrupt governments gain too much power, and, you know, greed and money tend to poison the well as sorts. And I feel like this film frames, you know, that potential outcome of the world that it seems like we could be heading towards. You know, I think it is hard to romanticize the current time as much with you know, all of the modern cars and film, and a mobile phone that's like the most uncinematic thing that could possibly exist. You know, if you go back to like the 50s or 60s or 70s or, you know, 80s, 90s, you know, any time before modern day, it's easier to frame that in a romantic angle, especially when we look at the past. You know, it's easy to romanticize the past through rose-tinted goggles, but framing a modern film in such a way that feels like you could make it, you know, it could be a classic film. It's not romanticized, but it's romanticized in the angle of cinema, in terms of making a really, you know, fucking excellently directed and made film that makes every set piece looks, you know, beautiful. I mean, it doesn't look beautiful, but every set piece is just used to its strongest degree, and it all feels so authentic and like lived in and real. And the variety of, you know, sort of locations that are in the film, you know, it starts really interestingly with it's basically a Michael Mann film almost, but it's sort of a heist sort of setup, and another genre the film sort of goes for, a heist setup it goes for in LA. And, you know, in my brain I'm just like, oh my god, this is literally a shot from Grand Theft Auto 5, you know. Like, there's that, which I think is executed really well, and then there's sort of later we're in sort of more urban environments, sort of small town America from what I remember. I could be getting the setting a bit wrong, but he's sort of like old apartment buildings that, again, just feel so authentic and lived in. Again, I wouldn't have any experience in these sorts of places. I've been to America once in my life, but then you also have later on there's sort of like shots, and it's not really a desert, but this set is so unique where certain scenes take place. And I don't want to spoil too much, but I don't know, I just love how the film was shot, to be honest. I feel like it's just such good use of framing and making the most out of all these sets, like I mentioned, and the sort of the mise-en-scene and such, you know, that exists within it. Yeah, sometimes these shots are the static and they just sit there and they let you, you know, sort of bask in the world for a bit. And, you know, a lot of films do this, and, you know, I'm not going to slag off certain old art films because they have a purpose of doing that, and that's a certain atmosphere they're going for, and that works. But, you know, it leaves you there just long enough for you to sort of breathe in the world a little bit and appreciate what you're seeing without, you know, feeling plodding and boring. And also these dynamic shots where, you know, sort of longer shots following a character through a certain room, and it does just feel sort of like dynamic, I suppose, the way it's moving around this world. Again, it makes the world feel real when we're not just doing a boring shot, reverse shot, and it's like, okay, I'm watching a film now. And then there's all this post-processing in a lot of modern films that pisses me off a lot, but that makes the film seem fake. But this just it feels so nice to just look at. Although I'm not a fan of fucking HDR, at least on my non-HDR screen that I watched this on, because everything looks so dark. You know, we don't need things to be so. That's my one critic. It's not even. I guess it's a criticism of HDR cameras. If I watch this in the cinema, I have none of this problem. But I missed it, unfortunately, in the cinema. You know, you can't watch everything. But like, why does HDR make everything so dark on certain screens? I want like a cinema HDR cut where you can, you know, look fucking all fancy, and then like a normal. I know there's non-HDR versions I can watch of the film, but it doesn't feel right. It still feels like it's appealing to the HDR. But anyway, that's I'm getting ahead of myself here. So as well, this was also the longest runtime for any of the nominated films. Surprised me it was longer than The Secret Agent, which that did drag on a bit for me, even though I thought it was a good film. It went on a little bit. It felt justified in its runtime, which a lot of these longer films, I don't think they are. They can usually be cut down. This went like by so fast for me. I don't think I wanted more by the end. If anything, there's nothing really I would have had cut out from it. It was just, you know, expertly paced, I suppose, for just to keep my attention through the whole runtime. I didn't want to turn it off. Again, it just feels like everything from a filmmaking angle was just pretty much perfectly done in this film, and I just can't get my head around how well it just executed on every single avenue of filmmaking it possibly could. You know, not only was it, you know, perfect in all these avenues, it was creative as well. It felt like it was trying something new, and it's insane that we can live in this world where occasionally one of these huge budget films comes along and it's relatively successful, and you know, it can take risks and it can push the medium forward, which I think is just a great thing, and I think it should be celebrated, and I think that's probably why this film's going to win Best Picture, and why I would be fine with it winning Best Picture. I'll be quite happy, to be honest. And just a shout out to the music as well. I thought the music was used so good in this, both, you know, I guess the soundtrack, I love the soundtrack in this film. It's, again, I've been saying, everything feels like a classic piece of cinema you're watching, but the music even felt like, you know, a classic film. It felt modern. It didn't feel like it was, you know, trying to like be a romantic old-timey swelling score or anything, but it felt modern, but it felt, you know, it had a bit of that romance, it had a bit of that emotion in it, which I can appreciate. And also just the songs this film used, you know, again, I don't want to spoil some of the I guess the needle drops too much, but it's not a very needle droppy film, but just the way it used some of the, I guess, some revolutionary songs, some white girl bangers, to be fair. I was used more diegetically, but yeah, just a great soundtrack, a great use of songs, a great score. I'm blown away by just how well made this. I sort of, it was hyped up in my mind, and I was going into it like this isn't gonna reach them heights, but surprisingly it really did. You know, probably it took me a little bit to get into the film. The film sort of started with this like prequel segment, which I won't spoil too much, but I mentioned it earlier. It was sort of a heist, and then it jumps maybe like 15-16 years into the future, into, I guess, the modern time. And it did take me a moment just to get, you know, acclimatized to the world it was creating and all these characters, which it took a while to sit with. I think maybe that's one of my criticisms. It took a while for me to get invested in the characters and things, but like, it was so well made, it didn't really, you know, I wasn't really bored watching it, so it didn't bother me too much. Yeah, that was a really interesting, you know, framing as well of sort of the old classic sort of revolutionaries. You know, they show footage of the Battle of Algiers, great film, and he sort of sat there watching it while his daughter's out, you know, fucking partying or whatever, and then there's a sort of comedic segment of him trying to get in contact with his old revolutionary, you know, sort of group, and then you've got some dude on the radio being like, oh, I need a password, and just being very bureaucratic, and his sort of old school sort of renegade-y, less careful, more, they were mavericks back in the day. They were outlandish, and they were strong in their messages, and maybe it's sort of trying to say that's softening over time, and even the revolution's become a bureaucratic thing, which is kind of a funny thing to be saying, but I've blabbled too much. Again, that's some of the themes there of, you know, sort of reflecting old and new revolutionaries and the state of modern times, and, you know, reflecting that on the past. I thought that was really interesting. I guess that was sort of paying maybe some homage to Vineland. I haven't read the book, but apparently this film is quite inspired by the book Vineland, which I think has some of them themes. Again, I haven't read it, so I don't know. I ain't got time to read books. I've got films and games to play, bro. I've got gooning to I ain't got time for all that book reading nonsense, you know. Come on, I gotta watch the Best Picture nominees. But yeah, I think I'll leave it there. That was my ranking of the Best Picture nominees. I think my opinions are quite valid at this point, so I'm quite happy with that. Stay tuned for more, maybe more film stuff. I'm not really sure what I'm doing, but I just thought this would be an interesting thing to do. Even though I didn't love all the films nominated, I think they were all interesting in their own way and all worth talking about. Even if a lot of them I had problems with, and I don't think they were perfect. It was a good batch this year of Best Picture nominees, and I'm happy with it. And I think I'll leave it there. So yeah, fucking one battle after another, man. What a film that was then. Let's go.